Hey, I'm Murray Heaton. I am a audio professional slash composer, sound designer, musician from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I wanted to take you through the sound design I did on a game called Megangard, which is a puzzle game that I worked on while I was doing my master's degree in music technology and digital media at the University of Toronto. I was mainly in charge of the music and ambience in this game. I focused on creating a piece of music, if you can call it that, that had the ability to jump to relative positions based on in-game parameters that would reflect the situation that the character was in, but not lose the composed nature of the music that was happening underneath. It was meant to feel seamless but adaptive. So we're going to look at that and how I accomplished that. I did not do the sound effects in this game. That was a collaborative effort with somebody else on my team, but we did work together to try to make sure that those sounds came from the same world to a certain degree. So we'll start with the opening menu, and you'll hear this flute melody come in that is the main theme in the game Megangard, and you'll hear it come back in a number of different ways throughout the game. But let's get just into the opening cinematic here, which is linear, as it turns out, but a good example of a version of this composition that you'll hear throughout the playthrough.
They say that we live on a fragment, that the world was much bigger before. Humanity used to wield magic, but then they angered the deities, who in turn shattered the world as punishment. 4 city-states emerged on the fragment and tried to use magic again, but the deities, enraged by this defiance, sent them into a century of darkness, hoping to teach them a lesson for good. Back home, we hear this tale a lot, passed down through generations. A reminder to steer clear of magic. My dad never believed this story. He's certain that history was flipped on its head, that, in reality, magic is what saved us from those disasters, a gift from the deities against the forces of darkness. That's why he sent me to travel to the academy, the other half of society. They've been studying magic for the last 3 centuries, sifting through the remnants of those old city-states. I'm hoping they'll take an outsider like me.
Here's the melody.
I'm almost there, just a day of travel left. I saw the ruins of the first settlement on the horizon as I went to sleep. The academy is just behind them. Next time I check in, who knows? Maybe I'll be a magic student.
Maybe you will, JJ. So here we are in the world of Megangard. The character is meant to find different spells that will help him travel through the world that he's found himself in on his way to the academy, where he's going to properly learn how to perform magic. This first area is sort of an open, abandoned desert area without much going on in the way of civilization, so it was meant to sound sort of sparse and open, with some wind sounds in the composition that, again, made it feel like you were in this space without having to have separate ambient sound effects that were being controlled separately than the music. This was all part of the same FMOD session, which we're going to look at afterwards. But for now, let's just skip to a point where we can hear the music change and see how that happens. So at this point, we've solved a puzzle and we're headed into a new area where we will see some enemies and we'll hear the music change. So as you can see, as soon as the enemies aggregate towards the character, the music changes with the stinger. And it remains in this sort of combat version of the composition until all the enemies are gone. And we used a parameter inside of FMOD to send that message to the game and back to FMOD to change the music in a relative position, as I mentioned before, so it sounds seamless. So the music's changed back to the sparse, non-battle version, and as the character makes its way around the corner here, he opens this door to a new area where you'll hear the composition change again. So this is the melody that we heard in the opening menu and the opening cinematic as well. But it's the fully fleshed out version of the melody with an A section and a B section, and we'll probably hear most of that as we watch our character travel through the game. You can hear as he goes underground. The music changes again, and this is using the same functionality, using a parameter inside FMOD to get information from the game to know to change to the relative position of the composition in the underground version of it, which will make more sense when we look at the FMOD session. But again, it's meant to not stop at all while the character makes his way through the world, but again, change to suit the conditions that we see in it. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit more to another part of this level where we encounter some enemies. Here we go. So we solved another puzzle. We're headed down to this area. Uh-oh, something's happening. Enemy will appear. And again, we can hear that stinger come in and the music shift, and then very quickly back again when the enemy is defeated to the battle version. Just to further illustrate the functionality of the dynamic music system, I want to show you when the character leaves the underground area. So we've finished beating these enemies, and now we're headed upstairs. And as we come outside, the music opens back up to the outside version of this composition. And now let's take a look at this FMOD session and see what we got going on here. So here we see our adaptive music system. There's a couple of things that I used to accomplish this. I composed the music outside of FMOD Studio in a digital audio workstation. I believe it was in Logic. And all the music, all the instruments that you hear throughout are recorded by myself, played by me. There's a flute and guitar and bass and some percussion instruments and things like that. There might have been some synthesizers used to achieve some of the more ambient sounds. Definitely some audio processing, again, to really capture the vibe. But this is less about that and more about how we accomplished the relative position changes. And up here we can see inside of our FMOD session 2 parameters, one called progress and one called combat. And they work together at the same time to change the position of the music based on where we are in the game, which is the progress parameter, and whether or not we are or are not in combat. And those are just controlled with numbers and parameters that are set in the code of the game. And when those parameters change in the game, they are sent to the FMOD session and the music changes. And we'll show you how that works. So I'll start at the beginning, where we are, again, in our progress parameter, we are in the desert. So a little stinger into the song. Now if we change to combat, FMOD will wait till the next beat so that it stays in time, and then play this stinger, this transitional stinger, and then enter the combat version of the desert theme. And as soon as we are no longer in combat, FMOD transitions back to the same relative position in the non-battle or the non-combat version of the desert music. Furthermore, if we enter a new area, enter a transitional state. We hear the melody come in, and then we jump to the ruins. And again, if we go to the cisterns, we can hear that become more underground, underwater sort of sounding to represent the feeling of the cisterns. And let's just go back outside again. So this is all accomplished through these transitional zones. So these green bars here allow the session to jump to, again, a relative position in another part of the session. And again, all these pieces of music were composed to be the same length and line up with each other fairly seamlessly, so that when we apply a fade using those transitions and those transition markers, then we shouldn't hear a lot of interference as the music changes from one version of it to another. So thanks for checking this out, and I hope you found it interesting and useful. Ciao.